Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome. Yeah, okay. Baruch Hashem. Okay. So, firstly, I want to dedicate the Shiur in honor of Bela Chaya Bas Miriam Rachel. The Shiur is dedicated to her, a great doctor, daughter, sister, advocate, person, friend. It's her birthday. She'd have a year of success and brachas. The Shiur is also dedicated Nishmas Leah Bas Yeshua Aryeh, whose 22nd yahrzeit is this week as well. So the Shiur is dedicated to them, all of the Torah and inspiration, and their schos. Amen. Okay, so we're going to, last week we spoke about Mishenichnas Adar Marvin B'Simcha, and we are going to continue that theme with a Purim Shiur today. And so when I was preparing this Shiur, so I have my my Sfarim that I normally look in for sources of inspiration, and I thought, before I look anywhere, let me see what Purim in the Warsaw Ghetto was like, from the Piazetzner Rebbe, who we've learned from his Sefer so many times, and he's such an incredible inspiration. So I thought, Purim of all times, let me see how the Piazetzner Rebbe tried to inspire the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto during Purim. And I was not disappointed, as always. It was just incredible, and I'm going to share it with you. He has two pieces, actually, a longer piece from 1942, and then a very, very small, but such a profound, incredibly inspiring piece from 1940. It so moved me that you could clearly see that something very difficult was going on, Purim 1940 in the Warsaw Ghetto. So I actually Googled it. And I just could see, just from reading it, I could see that you could feel the heaviness. And I Googled Purim 1940 Warsaw Ghetto, and I found out actually that was Purim of 1940 in the Warsaw Ghetto was when they announced, the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, announced an action that they're going to systematically murder the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I think up to that point, there was a hope of survival. And it seemed like from that point, there was no hope of survival. The Jews wouldn't survive. They ended up not actually doing that until 1942 is when they began the actual exterminating, murdering the Jews. But Purim 1940 is when it was announced. So you can imagine Purim, right? When we're trying to be B'Simcha, and this was just announced that every man, woman, and child in the ghetto was going to be murdered. And now, what does the rabbi get up and say? It's just unbelievable. It's so literally learning the piece, it brought tears to my eyes just learning it, especially after seeing that. So okay, with that introduction, let's jump in. We're going to start with, if you're here in person, you could follow along inside. The sources are here. We're going to start with the piece from 1942. I'm going to pull it up on my screen here for those who are following on Zoom who would like to follow along with me. Okay, here we go. So this is Purim 1942, and in this piece, also very inspiring piece, and he really gives us some deeper insights into the Yom Tov of Purim, what makes the Yom Tov of Purim unique, and why we will celebrate Purim even in the Messianic Era as well. So let's take a look. So he starts off, this first one is from Purim 1942, Tavshin Beis, Shoshanas Yaakov. This is the song, he quotes from the song that we sing after we read the Megillah on Purim Day, Shoshanas Yaakov, Tzahalav Tzamecham, Bireisim Yachad, Tchelis Mordechai. So the song begins, Shoshanas Yaakov is the Jewish people, the rose of Yaakov. Tzahalav Tzamecham, they were rejoicing, they were happy, they were besimcha. When? Bireisim Yachad, Tchelis Mordechai, when they saw Mordechai in the royal garments, when they saw him dressed in Tchelis. They saw him in the royal garments. So what's interesting is that then it continues that they rejoiced in the salvation, that they rejoiced in the salvation of the miracle of Purim. But what the Piazetzner Rebbe is going to ask is, why was there joy at seeing Mordechai in the royal garments? Why is that mentioned first? It's seemingly the great joy of Purim, the Tzalav Tzamecha, was the Chuasam L'Netzach, that we were saved, that we experienced salvation. Seemingly that should have been first. The first part of the song would have been the Tzalav Tzamecha was over the salvation. And then seeing Mordechai garbed in the king's royal garments being paraded around town, where they realized, hey, maybe things are turning here. That clearly was, a joy, and it was wonderful for the Jews to see Mordechai, their hero and the tzaddik ador, being recognized like that. But that should pale in comparison to the actual salvation. Yet in the song, that comes first. This is what he's going to ask. Lahavin, he says, ha'ikr simchasam haya mishuasam. The ikr joy, the main joy, was from the salvation, the miracle that happened. It wasn't that the main joy wasn't that Mordechai was enwrapped and clothed in the royal garb. I mean, that was beautiful. It was lovely. It was happy to see that. But was that the main joy of Purim? That should be the first thing that's mentioned in the song? So why is it in the song? The Mordechai dressing up in the royal garb is mentioned before the Chuasam Lenetzach, the Tikvasam B'chal Dor, that the salvation happened and it will be an eternal salvation, and it was a hope for every generation, that no matter how lowly we may find ourselves, no matter how difficult the matzav may be, I mean, because that was really the story of Purim. We were under a decree of annihilation, every man, woman, and child. There was nowhere to run. Achashverosh controlled the entire civilized world. There was nowhere to even go. There was nowhere to even escape to. In a very real way, the decree of Purim, had it been successful, would have been the end of Klal Yisrael. And the Jews felt it at that time. There was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to run. Once something was stamped with the king's signet ring, it was irrevocable. There was absolutely no hope. And yet, this incredible miracle happened. So that was really Tikvasam B'Kol Dor. That the story of Purim gives us hope in every difficult matzav. That no matter what our situation is, no matter on a global, on a macro, on a community, on a nation, on a national level, but also on a personal level, no matter what I'm going through, no matter what difficulties I'm experiencing, no matter what pain I'm going through, we see Hashem's miracles can happen and do happen. So that l'chera, that should be mentioned first in the song. Why the Levush Malchus? Why Bireisim Yachad Techelis Mordechai? Why is that the great joy? And he brings a very fascinating idea that exemplifies the source of the miracle. Let's go a little further. Let's see what he says. He quotes a pasuk in Tehillim Kuf Beis. That when the impoverished person, impoverished here doesn't only mean poor financially, it means a person who's in need, a person who's going through difficulties. He's wrapped up lifnei Hashem yishpach, and he pours out his heart before Hashem. And so the Piazetz and Rebbe explains as follows: when we all have difficulties in life, and we all have different levels of difficulties. Some difficulties are small, and they're manageable, they're bearable, and some are larger and become unbearable. And he says, he says, when small difficulties happen to us, but they're somehow contained, we can bear them, we could manage them. We're going through a difficulty, but we could hold it in. We could contain it within ourselves. In other words, somebody looking at me wouldn't necessarily know I'm going through a difficulty. I can mask it. I have that ability. When the pain is manageable, I'm able to walk outside, mask it. Nobody could recognize it. I'm holding it within. Because these difficulties are smaller than me. I can bear them. They may be painful. They may be tragic, but there's something that I can bear. But I can contain them. However, when those difficulties increase, I'm no longer able to contain them within me. Sometimes the pain and the difficulties that I'm going through are so intense and so powerful, I can't contain them. I have to let it out. Either I let it out by speaking about them, or I let it out in tears, or tzayka, or crying out. And the reason is I can't contain it. Though it's literally the tsaras, the pain is spilling out of me. And he says the reason why this is because the tsaras are so intense, the difficulty is so painful that I'm not able to contain it. And if it becomes even more than that, if the pain becomes so intense, the difficulties that I'm going through become so immense, then it's not just that I can't contain it, but it's literally I'm drowning in them. I'm literally completely encompassed by the pain, encompassed by the sorrow. But Bechinas v'Yakov Rosh v'Tala and Eicha, it says they'll be surrounded by bitterness and pain. And that's what it feels like. He says, Tefillah la'ani kiyatev. So this is what it's talking about in the Tehillim. When the prayer of the ani kiyatev, when he's wrapped up, when he's so engulfed in pain, when we're so engulfed in our tsaras that we feel literally yatev, we're wrapped up, we're consumed by it. Kiyatev is atzmi ba'aniyas tsaras. He's literally wrapped up in his pain and in his tsaras. And therefore, lifnei Hashem yishpech zeicha, it pours out before Hashem. This is what David HaMelech is saying. I have no choice. I'm encompassed by the pain, by the tsaras. Sheshefich is kol atzma. He pours himself out before Hashem. Kamei she'amar b'mizmor, Keli Keli lama azavtani. This is what Esther said before she went into Achashverosh's inner sanctum. Keli Keli lama azavtani. My God, why have you abandoned me? Kamayim nishpachti. I pour my soul out before you. So there's different levels of pain. There's the pain that we can contain. There's the pain that we can't contain that's bigger than that. And then there's the pain that's even bigger than that, that starts even bigger than that not only cannot contain it, we're literally engulfed by it and drowning in it. So these are the different levels of tsaras that we go through, chas v'shalom, in life. He says, but it works the other way as well. The kain lahepach, kash Hashem ezer leish, when Hashem's salvation comes. Rak Yeshua Katana Kathitzer Chaysav. Sometimes the salvation comes and it's a Yeshua Katana. It's just exactly what we needed to get us out of the difficulty. Oz who makif as the Yeshua Shabbaloi. So then you contain the salvation that comes to you. It's a small salvation. You had a small difficulty, and that difficulty was removed. The difficulty was contained, the salvation is contained. But if Hashem's salvation is not only saving you from the difficulty that you experienced, but it's even giving you brachas on top of that, more than you needed. Then the salvation is something that encompasses you, totally surrounds you. You're literally drowning in the salvation, so to speak. This is like, for example, this is one of the mizmorim that people say in Chedesh Nisan. And I think it's on Parshas of Chedesh, people say this Yetzer, Yeshuas, the Yeshuas of Nisan, boy makifos, they were surrounding us, they were encompassing us on the salvation of Chedesh Nisan. Because it wasn't just, what did we need? We needed to be taken out of Egypt. But Hashem did so much more than just literally taking us out. He did all of the makos, he destroyed our enemies, he brought us tremendous wealth, the Bizas Hayam. There was miracles way beyond what we needed. So those are the two types of salvation. There's a small salvation. It takes away just the pain that we're suffering from. And then you have the salvation that not only takes away the pain, but gives us much, much more. So he says, Ha'inyan efsher ki neida sheba, and then now he explains a Kabbalistic concept of where these two levels of salvation come from. And this is going to need a little bit of a preface. So let me give a little bit of an introduction. There's two types of divine energy, according to Kabbalah, which usually the Pizatz Rebbe does not get into Kabbalistic ideas, but here he does. There's two types of divine energy that influence the world. You have what is called the Or Panini, or another word in Kabbalistic language, it's called Mamali Kol Alman, the light that permeates the world. And this light is a very contracted, concealed divine energy, and it permeates every level of creation according to its capacity to receive. So the higher worlds are getting a higher divine emanation, the lower worlds are getting a lower divine emanation. Each human being gets the divine emanation, the divine energy, the divine light force that he or she is capable of receiving. That's the Or Panimi. And then we have what's called an Or Makif, the infinite light from Hashem. That light is a finite light that's contracted and concealed to the finite parameters and is able to permeate the finite parameters of every creation. And then you have what's called the Or Makif, the light that transcends creation, this infinite energy from Hashem that is too intense and too powerful to enclose itself within creation. It would obliterate creation. It would obliterate the finite because it's an infinite energy. So it emanates into the world, but instead of permeating the world, because it cannot permeate the world, because the infinite can't permeate the finite without obliterating the finite, it affects the world from outside the world. It's like if you have it's like an example of this would be, you have the light of the sun. If I open up the curtains in the room, the light of the sun illuminates the room, but if the sun is not in the room, the sun is millions of miles away from the room, but it's permeating the room from outside the room. It's affecting the room from outside the room. And then you have a lamp inside the room. The lamp I could turn on, that illuminates from inside. So you have the light that illuminates from outside and the light that's coming from inside. Okay. So he says the small miracles, the miracles that are the Yeshuas and the salvations that take away just the pain that I'm going through, that's an emanation from the Or Panimi. That's the light, that the constricted light, the finite light that permeates creation. So it's a bracha from Or Panimi that eliminates the tsaras. And then he's going to say, but when we experience miracles and salvations that are way above and beyond even what we needed at the moment, that come with all kinds of brachas, that's coming from the Or Makif. That's the infinite energy of Hashem. That's the infinite light that is making its way into creation. And he says, he's going to explain that Purim comes from this Or Makif. Let's take a look inside of his words now. So it's known that these mystical ideas, that you have the lights of creation and you have the lights of the creator, the energy of the creator, and the vessels of creation. And the light permeates the vessels of creation. The Or Panimi fits into the vessel. The Or Makif spills over the vessel, shatters the vessel, so to speak. So he says, Or Panimi, who Or Cotton, the Or Panimi is a smaller light, it's a constricted light, it's a finite light. The vessel of creation is able to internalize it. The Or Makif, who Or Rav, the Or Makif is an infinite light, a powerful, much more intense light. The vessel of creation can't contain it, so therefore it emanates from outside of, it affects creation, but from outside of creation. It doesn't permeate creation. It literally surrounds it, it encompasses it from outside. It's interesting because these two lights are comparable to the different kinds of pain. There's a pain that we hold within us, that we can contain within us, and then there's the pain that literally encompasses us. He says, Kol Yeshuas al yedei sfiros Hashem mashpil lana kaneda. All salvations, all Yeshuas, all nisim and neflois, miracles and salvations that we experience, whether on a national level or on a micro level, are these coming from these emanations. This is hashpah from Hashem, whether it's an Or Panimi or whether it's an Or Makif, whether it's a finite light, a smaller, more contained salvation, or whether it's a spilling over salvation. He says, L'chein kish Hashem sheilich leish Yeshua al yidei ez the sfira. So when Hashem sends us a salvation from a specific divine emotional attribute, he says, so when this light is coming, when this salvation is coming from this Or Panimi, from this inner light, from the more finite light, from the more contracted light, then you have this divine emotion, let's say the divine emotion of love, of chesed, that's classically where salvation comes from. He says, so then you have this measured divine emotion of chesed, of love, that permeates the creation, that permeates my being and brings me that salvation. He says, he says, but since this comes from a specific divine emanation, even if it's, he says, higher than what the person himself is usually able to contain, but since it's coming from a specific finite emanation, therefore the salvation is also an inner salvation. It only takes away the specific difficulty and pain that the person's going through. He says, he gives the person exactly what they need to take away that exact difficulty. But if the salvation comes from this infinite light, if it comes from the infinite energy of Hashem, the salvation also is coming in an encompassing way. That means it gives not just what we need, but even more than we need. Classically, the story of Pesach was this or makif, as we said. Yeshua is boy makifles. Yeser harbe mekfihat tzurich leinitin. The person is giving way more than he has the capacity to even contain. So just like the tsaros were overflowing, just like the pain was overflowing, sometimes the salvation can come in a way where literally the salvation is overflowing. And we're given not just what we need, but way more than we need. The efsher shebishvil zeh. And this, he's going to say, this was the story of Purim. He says, in this contrast, the story of Hanukkah with the story of Purim. He says, Ve'efshar, he says, B'shvil zeh b'neis Hanukkah. He says, if you look at the miracle of Hanukkah, Shahaya be'eretz Yisrael b'zman beis hamikdash, right? The miracle of Hanukkah took place when we were in Eretz Yisrael, when we had the beis hamikdash. Mekam makayim, haisi yeshuasam rakaf yitzur chaysehem. But the salvation of Hanukkah was just what we needed at that point, meaning that we weren't able to go into the Beis Hamikdash, we weren't able to light the menorah, we weren't able to practice Yiddishkeit. The salvation came, we defeated the Greek army, and we went back into the Beis Hamikdash. We got exactly what we needed. He said, we were freed from our enemies, that were persecuting us. But we didn't go and capture their land. We didn't go and kill many of them and take their land. That we didn't do. We just were able to chase them out of Eretz Yisrael, and we were able to be victorious, chase them out and take our land back and take our Beis HaMikdash back. It was a miracle from Or Panimi. It gave us exactly what we needed, a beautiful salvation. Masha'ain came, but Purim, we got even more than what we needed. Shahaya be'eretz amamin. First of all, Purim happened not in Eretz Yisrael. Purim happened in exile. Purim happens between the first and second Beis Hamikdash. So we're in exile. We're in Bavel. Akate avdei Achashverosh, the Gemara says. One of the reasons why we don't say Hallel on Purim is because even after the miracle, we were still enslaved to Achashverosh. We were still under his domain. Mekal Makayim, nevertheless, if you think about what happened, it wasn't just our immediate needs were fulfilled in that Purim miracle. Our immediate needs were just that the decree would be annihilated, right? The decree would be over. We would survive. That was the immediate need. He says, but it wasn't just that we weren't killed, but it was even more. Everything turned over. Not only were we not killed, but we ended up killing many of our enemies. And the Jewish people became feared. And Mordechai became the Mishnah Lamelech, became literally the second in charge of the government. So not only were we saved, but the whole situation was overturned, and we got the upper hand, and we killed many of our enemies, and we became the ones who were in charge. Mordechai became Mishnah Lamelech and became a very high person in the government hierarchy. We ruled over them. So Purim was a miracle from Or Makiv, where not only did we get the salvation that we needed, we got way more than that. We killed many tens of thousands of our enemies in the story of Purim. So this is a miracle from Or Makiv. This is the infinite light of Hashem. This is the power of Purim. This is a revelation from the Or Makiv. When Mashiach comes, this is the reality of the Messianic era. Because why don't we have an intense revelation from that infinite light now? Because it would obliterate the vessels of creation. The whole point of all the Torah mitzvahs that we do from the time of Matan Torah until the end of time, until Mashiach comes, Every mitzvah that we do and every piece of Torah, every part of Torah that we learn serves to refine ourselves and creation, so that in the Messianic era we'll have a revelation of Or Makif, and the vessels of creation will have been so refined by our Torah and mitzvahs that we will actually experience the Messianic era in the physical realm. So he says, this is what happened on Purim. We had it's almost a me'ain of a similar revelation of the Messianic era, where this infinite energy imbued into creation. And that's why the miracles were way beyond what we actually needed. The miracles were literally spilling over the vessels of creation. And so this is why it wasn't just we were saved, but it was nahapechu. Everything was completely overturned. We became in charge. We became powerful. We killed many of our enemies. He says, "Who the isim of the Pardes? The or makif ain shum pagam sheh." Pardes is the Kabbalistic work. It says this or makif, no negative can control it, can be shaylit over it, can damage it. It's a powerful, intense, infinite light of Hashem. It obliterates negativity. This is all Kabbalah. Why we could go with our talis katan, those who wear a talis katan under their clothes, into the Beis HaKisei. We can't put our tefillin into the base, take our tefillin into the base, can't take a Sefer Torah into the Beis HaKisei. You can't take a mezuzah into the bathroom, but our talis katan we can, because the talis katan represents this Or Makif. It encompasses us. And this Or Makif cannot be negated by any negativity at all, any spiritual impurity. The kaven she'ein aklipis shel Beis HaKisei nechazes b'talis katan, because the spiritual negativity that's in the Beis HaKisei, the tzitzis, doesn't affect the talis katan and tzitzis she'ein bechinas Or Makif, because they are this Or Makif.
Can a person wear the talis?
That's a good question. Why can't we wear the talis gadol? We don't wear the talis gadol into that. That's even more of an Or Makif. That's a very good question. I think it's because here I think it's more out of respect for the mitzvah, because here the talis katan is under our clothes. So I think that's why. So therefore, the miracle of Hanukkah, which was this Or Prati, the Or Panimi that was in Eretz Yisrael and in the Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash was Kaim, we were more capable, we were more fitting for salvation. We were in a higher spiritual state in the times of Hanukkah. We had Eretz Yisrael, we had the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, it was possible for the Yeshua to come from the Or Panimi, because we were vessels, we were receptacles for it. Even though many Jews had assimilated in the times of Hanukkah, we still had the Beis Hamikdash, we still had our holy land. So therefore, the miracle in Hanukkah was just what they needed at that time. But Purim, we were not vessels at all. We were in Bavel. We didn't have the Beis Hamikdash. The Jews were totally assimilated into Persian culture. It was a time of very high assimilation. He says, "Purim begalus dakate avdei Achashverosh anan." We were in galus. Lo yahayu royim kal kach legeula. We weren't fit for geula. We weren't roy. We weren't. Geula wasn't even appropriate. We were completely assimilated outside of our Beis Hamikdash, outside of our holy land. Kanedim and Medrashai Kitrig v'Kvar Nichtav Chas v'Chalila Gzar Din Aleya. As the Medrash says, that the decree of annihilation didn't just come from Achashverosh. This was a spiritual decree based upon the negative behavior of the Jews at that time. So therefore, we weren't even a keli for that Or Panimi. Therefore, we needed an absolute massive salvation, spiritually and physically. So therefore, the Purim, the salvation came from the Or Makif, where it literally spilled over into all, not just saving them from death, but spilled over into all other kinds of miracles. Nahapechu, where everything turned over, where we became powerful, where we killed tens of thousands of our enemies. She'ein pagam v'kitrik shelit, no negativity could be shed. This is why it was mahapech, because in the face of the Or Makif, it obliterates all negativity. All spiritual negativity is obliterated. And therefore, we experienced an even greater salvation than we needed at the time. And now he concludes this piece, and this explains why were we so excited that Mordechai was in the Levush Malchus, because the Levush Malchus shows that was a miracle. We didn't need Mordechai to be in Levush Malchus. That was part of the spilling over. That was part of the Or Makif. It showed the Jewish people where the miracle was coming from. It's coming from the Or Makif. It's coming from this messianic redemption. It's coming from this messianic light. That is why in the times of Mashiach, all the Yom Tovim will be batal. We're not going to be celebrating any of the Yom Tovim except for Purim. Purim will still be celebrating because Purim was like this messianic redemption in the vessels of creation. It was like a me'ain of the Messianic era. So it spilled over, and it spilled over into miracles that were beyond what we needed, including Techelis Mordechai in the royal garb. That's why it's mentioned first in the song. Just a beautiful explanation and perspective on the Yom Tov of Purim. Why were they joyous? When they all saw Mordechai in the royal garb. And he explains, when they saw Mordechai and clothed in the garments of salvation, Hevinu, the Jews understood. This is more than we needed. Shema Bechinas or Makiv by Yeshua. And where is our Yeshua coming from? It's coming from this Or Makiv. It's coming from this powerful light. The Simchu Shavinu, and they rejoiced because they understood that if it's coming from the Or Makif, Chuasam Tia Lenetzach, it will be eternal. If it's coming from this Or Makif, Purim will be an eternal Yom Tov. The Tikvasam B'Kal Dor will bring hope to every generation. And it does. Purim literally brings hope to every generation that no matter what we are going through, no matter how unfit we may be, no matter how assimilated Klal Yisrael may be, no matter how difficult the matzav may be, no matter how dark the situation may be, nothing can stand in the way of this Or Makif when it comes into the world. And when they saw Mordechai in the royal garments, which was way beyond what was needed to bring them salvation, that was the spilling over of this Or Makif. They understood it. So this was a hope for us that we could experience salvation. Whether we're fit for that salvation, or whether the generation is completely unfit. People ask, how can Mashiach come in our times? So many Jews are assimilated. So many Jews are far away from Judaism. How could Mashiach ever come now? The story of Purim tells us. Even if we're not fit, even if the generation is not roy. Well, first of all, we have to understand, Mashiach's not coming because of the schus of our generation. We are the ants on the shoulders of giants. But this is all it will take is a little bit. What did it take for the salvation of Purim to happen? It took Mordechai to inspire the Jewish people to tefillah and tshuva. Our tshuva is all it will take for Mashiach to happen, even if the generation is not fit. It'll come from that Or Makif. He says, "Tamashich Yeshua Purim l'kal deris miYisrael," and this we get from Purim. The salvation of Purim, the story of Purim, the miracle of Purim is drawn into every generation. Every generation can experience this miracle where the Or Makif can come and bring immense salvation. Even if we're not fit, just like in Purim, we weren't fit. Why does Purim affect every generation? Because Purim came from that infinite light, the Or Makif. There's no negativity can damage it. Rak tamid nimshachis. It's eternal. It's infinite. It is there now for every generation. That's the story of Purim. Okay, that was his essay in Purim in 1942. Beautiful, powerful, and it gives. Yes, please.
So is it talking about Mordechai in the middle of the Megillah when it's Kacha Yaseh La'ish, like as it's unfolding, they're realizing?
Yes, this is it.
Like, oh
exactly.
God,
that they're starting to see.
And when he gets like appointed,
it could be depending on the person. Some were able to see it then. I'm sure Mordechai was able to even see it then, and Esther were able to see it then. And some who were maybe more assimilated saw it afterwards. Looking back now, wow, this is from the Or Makif. Exactly. It could be both. Good point. Okay. Let's turn to Purim 1940. It's a small little thing. You see here, it's a small little piece. It's like 3 little paragraphs. It's a small, tiny little piece, but it is so, it's powerful. At least it was powerful for me. And then when you realize, when I read this and I went and Googled, and I mentioned before, this piece was said right after the Nazis Yamach Shmam announced that all the Jews in Warsaw are going to die. They're going to kill everybody. And this was announced Purim. In 1940. And so now the rabbi has to get up and inspire his congregation. And this is what he says to them. And this is why this work is just so profound to me, because as just I could never imagine as a rabbi. I have a difficult time inspiring Jews in Teaneck in 2023. So to hear a rabbi in 1940 in the Warsaw ghetto, the lashonis that he uses, the language that he uses, the sources that it's just such a source of inspiration for me. So let's take a look here. And I think it's important for all of us. Number one, I think it's the greatest honor to them, to the Jews in Warsaw, and especially to the Piasetzner Rebbe himself, that we learn his Torah and that we keep it alive. It's our honor to do that. I mean, these are the Jews who walked through fire, so that they went through fire, lived through fire, so that we could live in peace. We owe it to them to learn this Torah, but even more so, to be inspired by the Piasetzner's Torah is really showing the Piasetzner and all of Klal Yisrael, Torah is eternal. And even though we're not in the Warsaw ghetto now and we're not under a decree of annihilation, God forbid, nevertheless, we can utilize his Torahs for ourselves and inspire ourselves in our own situations, in our own difficulties, even though they're not comparable. But in that way, his Torah is alive forever. And that is the greatest gift, I believe, that we could give. So this is why it means so much to me to learn this. Isa b'Tkuni Zohar HaKodesh. He quotes from the Tkuni Zohar. This is a famous idea. Shapurim Yom HaKippurim, right? Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim, right? This is a famous idea that Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim, which implies that Purim is even higher than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is only Yom Kippurim. It's a day that's Kippurim, that's like Purim. It doesn't even reach the level of Purim. This is what the Zohar says, that on some level, the Kedusha of Purim is even greater than the holiness of Yom Kippur. And based on the previous piece, we could sort of understand why it's a little bit of a messianic redemption on Purim that we experienced. Okay. But he's going to bring another idea here, how Purim is like Yom Kippur. There's a comparison, there's a parallel here. And he brings it in a way that I never thought of before until I learned this piece, and it's beautiful. The Efshem Aram is Gamlazah. He says, so we all know the famous idea that Purim is that Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim. It's a day like Purim. But he says there's another remez here. There's another idea here in comparing Yom Kippur to Purim. And he says as follows: Shekamoy Yom Kippurim hatainis v'hatshuva b'yom zeh. When Yom Kippur comes and we fast, right, and we do tshuva, we don't ask ourselves right before Kol Nidre starts, am I in the mood of this? Right? Am I in the mood of fasting? Let me just decide right now. Am I in the mood of fasting? Am I in the mood of doing tshuva? We don't ask ourselves that. Yom Kippur comes. It's Yom Kippur. We fast. Not just if we want to do this. If we're in the mood of doing it, we do it. Rak bein im reitza bein loy. Whether we're in the mood of Yom Kippur or not, whether we're hungry or not, whether we want to do tshuva or not, whether we're in that spiritual mindset or not, Yom Kippur is here. We're fasting and doing tshuva. It's not dependent on our mood. So he says, "Mekaimam mipnei gezeres hakadosh baruch hu." We observe Yom Kippur, not whether we're in the mood or not. It's a gezer of Hashem. It's a decree of Hashem. And we can imagine, none of us in 1940, after hearing such a decree, are in the mood to celebrate Purim, right? We can imagine. He says, but Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim. It's the same thing. He says, V'kein gam simchas Purim. He says, simchas Purim. I mean, this brings me to tears. I'm going to cry when I read it. It's not just if you're in the mood of being joyful. It's not just if you're in a good mood on Purim, then, hey, Purim Sameach. Oh, you're in a good mood, okay, be Sameach on Purim. Or even if Purim's not even if you're in a matzav of where you're able to be besimcha, then I'll be besimcha on Purim. That's not what Purim's about. We're not just happy on Purim if we're in a good mood. We're not just happy on Purim if the circumstances in our lives empower us to be in a good mood. Then we'll celebrate Purim. No, that's not what Purim's about. Purim's just like Yom Kippur. Rakamim hu b'shiflus b'shviras alev. Even if we find ourselves broken, lowly and brokenhearted. Hamoyach v'kal ruchei nirmas. In our minds and our whole spirits are trampled. Chayku. Purim is a chayk. This is Hashem's gezerah. It's not just about if we're in the right mood and we're in the right mindset. Every one of us has to be able to put into our hearts at least a little spark of joy. We have to be Makayim Purim, we have to fulfill Purim. Purim is Yom Kippur. There's an analogy between Yom Kippur, and this is the analogy, he says. Just like on Yom Kippur, we don't only observe it if we're in the right mood, and we're in the right mindset, and we're ready to do tshuva. So too on Purim, we don't only observe it if we're in the right mood, or our circumstances are those that enable us to be joyous. No, even if we're brokenhearted, and even if we're trampled upon, Purim is Hashem's gezerah, and we are going to fulfill it. And therefore, every one of us has to allow even a nitzutz shel simcha, a little spark of simcha to enter into our hearts. The Cain gam amayla lamata. Kamei, and so too from amayla lamata, from Hashem to us. Kamei sheyom haKippurim, atzumei shel yom mechaper. And he brings such a beautiful idea here to empower the Jews of Warsaw and empower us as well. He says, just like Yom Kippur works not only lamata lamayla. Yom Kippur works not only if I do tshuva completely, then Hashem forgives me. Yom Kippur also works lamayla lamata. There's a concept of etzuma shel yom mechap. The essence of the day itself atones. All I need to do is at least start the atonement process. And then the essence of the day itself empowers me, gives me koyach to complete my tshuva. And this is what he says. This is according to the Rambam. Hilchos tshuva. Va'afilu im lo hishlim kol tshuvasai. Even if on Yom Kippur I don't really complete my tshuva, I don't do a full tshuva, I just start the process. Omer Rabbi says in Masechtas Yuma, shemechaper that Yom Kippur is mechaper. Etzuma shel yom mechaper. The essence of the day brings atonement. If I start the atonement process, he says this analogy works on Purim as well. So it's not just milamata lamayla that just like on Yom Kippur we have to fast even if we're not in the mood. So too Purim we have to rejoice even if we're not in the mood. So too lamayla lamata. Just like on Yom Kippur, Hashem gives us the koyach to do tshuva, helps us, empowers us, helps complete our tshuva. It's suma shel yom mechaper. The Cain gam b'Purim. On Purim too, the powerful divine revelation that emanates on Purim. Even if the Jew finds themselves in Warsaw under a decree of death, and we're not able to be b'simcha kafi shetzurich liyos, at least we're not able to be b'simcha as it's fitting to be, as we need to be. And therefore, since I'm not able to be b'simcha, my Veda on Purim is perhaps not b'shleimus, it's not whole, it's not complete. Nevertheless, just like on Yom Kippur, Hashem empowers us if we start the process. He says the same thing on Purim. No matter what we are going through, if we are able to allow to enter into our hearts a small nitzut shel simcha, a little spark of joy. If we are able to at least start the joy process on Simcha, allow a little spark, a little nitzutz, a little spark of joy, then the Simcha and the Yeshua and the salvation of Purim will come to the world. Just like on Yom Kippur, the tshuva comes to the world. Etzuma kapara comes to the world. Etzuma shel yom mechaper. So too on Purim, joy, simcha, salvation comes to the world. And therefore, if I just start the process, just like on Yom Kippur, Hashem will complete the process and bring us on an individual level, simcha and salvation, and bring us all on a national level. Simcha and salvation, sahala v'samecha for Klal Yisrael. And and this is how he ends off that piece. And it's just when I learned that, I immediately Googled Warsaw, Purim, 1940 Warsaw Ghetto. And because I saw, it's clear something is going on there. He's speaking to Klal Yisrael. And that's all he says, just that one little, which is shorter than his usual pieces. And sure enough, yes, this was after the decree that every Jew in Warsaw would be killed and murdered. So such a powerful piece, but such a powerful lesson for us that when Purim comes, But it's not just Purim. We learned a piece a few years ago from the Yisa Bracha, the Majid Rebbe, that it doesn't say Mishenichnas Purim Marvin B'Simcha, right? It says Mishenichnas Adar Marvin B'Simcha. So the Yisa Bracha asks a question. The Majid Rebbe asks a question. We learned this piece a few years ago, so some of you might remember it, but this piece is worth chazering every single year, right before Adar. And now we're Rosh Chodesh Adar, so this is such an appropriate time to mention this piece, and it fits in so beautifully with the piece from the Piazatzna. He says it doesn't say Mishenichnas Purim Marvin B'Simcha. It says Mishenichnas Adar Marvin B'Simcha. But think about it. Why are we Marvin B'Simcha in the first half of Adar? The first half of Adar was horrible. We were under a decree of annihilation. The salvation didn't come until the middle of Adar, until Purim time, which was Yadalad Adar. So the whole first half of Adar was a time of mourning, a time of decree, a time of where we were intensely afraid. And yet today, we start being besimcha, mishenichnas Adar marvin besimcha. So says the Yisa Bracha, this is the secret weapon of the Jewish people. That when we are able to feel simcha, and where does simcha come from? We once learned a piece from the Nesiva Shalom a few years ago also, I think last year, the first piece in the first mimer in the Nesiva Shalom and Chodesh Adar on Purim, and he says the simcha on Purim, the simcha on Adar comes from betachin. Betachin, relying on Hashem, betachin and emunah. That's the underlying foundation of joy. Joy doesn't come from physical possessions. Joy doesn't come from wealth. Joy doesn't even come from good health. Or even we could experience simcha in every matzah, because simcha is the reliance, the betachan, the emunah, that whatever I'm going through, Hashem is there, and Hashem can and will take me out of it. That's where our simcha comes from. When we are able to experience this, not just when we experience salvation, but even before we experience salvation, when we're in the depths of the darkness. In the Mishenichnas Adar, we were in the depths of the darkness. We were still under a decree of annihilation. And yet, the capacity when we're experiencing darkness to be able to have that betachan and reliance on Hashem is the vessel that brings salvation. That is the trigger for salvation. That is the trigger that our emunah, our betachan, our simcha is what triggers the divine emanation of salvation. Hashem reacts to our actions. So this is why Mishenichnas Adar Marvin B'Simcha, and this is what the Piazatzin is telling them, that even if we could just have a nitzutz of simcha this Purim, even notwithstanding what we are going through, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will fulfill it, will be mashlim it, so that we'll be able to experience real joy, real salvation, real Yeshua. And the same thing with us, and the same thing with all of Klal Yisrael. The world is a scary time. We're going through difficulties in our own lives, perhaps. Anti-Semitism is in vogue today. We have all kinds of reasons to be depressed and dejected. But Mishenichnas Adar Marvin B'Simcha, it's time for us to be mischazik, to strengthen ourselves and our own emunah, in our own betachin, so that we could experience joy. And I don't want to make the job even harder, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, Mishenichnas Adar Marvin B'Simcha doesn't mean just that we have to be joyous every day of simcha. It means every single day we have to have more joy than we had yesterday. Marbim B'Simcha, increase in joy every single day. That is our avodah. So if we, just us who are on this Zoom call and on this, just sitting around this table, and those of us who are listening to the shiur, whenever you may be listening to it, wherever you may be, if you yourself are able to strengthen yourself, to strengthen your betachan and your emunah, to truly experience simcha. It doesn't even have to be an overflowing simcha, just a nitzutz of simcha. Begin the process. Then we are enough to bring that ultimate salvation to the world, so that all of Klal Yisrael experiences this Adar even before Purim, so that we're able to read the story of Purim together with Mashiach Tzidkenu, the salvation, the Yeshua, the Tzahala, the Samecha, the Yehudim, Haisa, Erev, Simchas, V'yikar, V'sasim, with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'imheir V'imenu, Amen. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I hope this empowers your avodah in Chodesh Adar and on Purim. And Amir Tashem, we'll see everybody next week. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful week. Thank you.
I want to say.